space station Mir, alone in space, orbiting the Earth since 1986. Approaching Mir is the space shuttle Atlantis. The orbiter closes in on the Russian space station. Finally, contact. For the first time since the Apollo-Soyuz mission almost 2 decades ago, Americans and Russians shake hands in space, ushering in a new era of space exploration. The historic flight by the Atlantis crew was the first of many missions that would dock with Mir. The astronauts themselves will tell what it was like as they caught their first spectacular views. Share the excitement of finally meeting and working side by side with their comrades in space. The Americans will experience their first Mir spacewalk. Be part of the longest stay in space, 188 days, by an American woman astronaut. And come along for a floating tour inside of Mir. These are the Space Shuttle missions to Mir.
Liftoff of Space Shuttle Discovery on a mission to prepare for the next era of world cooperation in space.
Hello, program Houston.
Roger, roll, Discovery. Houston is now controlling Discovery on its 20th trip to space. Discovery rolling on course for an orbit with the Mir space station. Mir currently half a world away above the Indian Ocean.
First time we saw a station approximately 50 miles from us. And we receive, in this time, we receive message from Station Mir about we have decision about 30 feet approach.
This is the first time when we've been able to show you how dramatic the speed looks on orbit. We're traveling at over 5 miles a second. It's the first time we've had other human beings in another spacecraft able to take our picture. We fly underneath the Mir slightly faster and then climb up in front of Mir, co-altitude, where we eventually slow down and fly co-speed.
This is Valery Polyakov. He's the cosmonaut who's been up there over a year now and will soon set a record. This is Elena Kondakova speaking to us on the shuttle. In fact, all the astronauts got a chance to speak on our VHF radio to the cosmonauts on Mir.
As Jim climbed up towards the V-bar, that's basically the horizontal line tangent to the Earth where we're going to meet up with Mir, I was ranging with the laser, and meanwhile they were looking at us coming up. And this is something we only saw when we came back, and we appreciate how dramatic it is. Once we were at about 400 feet, Jim arrested the approach to the Mir, and we basically station kept there for a few minutes before we started our timed approach. Once that time came up, we basically had a window to make, and Eileen kept us straight. We were flying range rate commands using another laser tracking system, the trajectory control sensor, in the middle of the bay, ranging off the docking port here, which is the White Cross. And Jim will tell you what he's doing now.
This is a view taken from one of the payload bay cameras, and it shows how stable the orbiter is as it approaches to the target. Very few inputs were required. We saw no motion from the solar rays. You see the solar rays slewing. We were in the low Z mode, essentially not pluming the station. We, of course, didn't want to damage something this beautiful. And again, you can see how precise the orbiter is. We didn't do very much, it just stayed in the right place. It's a little bit easier to fly than the simulators, and that's good.
And you can see Vladimir and I are both crashing into each other, trying to get as good a shot as the other. And you can see the windows. There's Elena Kondakova with her knee.
We wave each other, and for you, of course. I don't know who was it. This somebody new on board station. This is Valery Polyakov, and this is Commander Alexander Viktorenko. His picture from Station Mir.
It shows how well the vehicle has been designed. After we remained at our closest point of approach for about 10 minutes, crew members helping me to make sure that we didn't go 1 inch closer than the flight limit of 10 meters. You can see the solar array slewing. Again, no motion at all from our jets. We saw no interaction. After 10 minutes, we backed away and proceeded out to 450 feet and initiated a fly around as a photo survey.
In fact, this is one of the harder things for Jim and I to sort of talk about in the cockpit. As we backed away, Mir maneuvered so that we no longer had a center line towards the docking port. And at 450 feet, we started to climb up above it and behind it in our orbit plane so that we would do a full circle around it, basically trying to stay at 450 feet.
If anyone has any doubts about what we're doing in the future, let us assure you that we are on the right track. You can't help but see a vehicle like this that's been up since 1986. Just stunning, just breathtaking, and it's time to join our forces and make both of our programs better.
This is what 17,500 miles per hour looks like from the top.
This is our parting shot, and it was a pretty sad moment, I think. We had a long day, it was busy, but one of the most exciting days in my life, I must say.
One of the things we do on every flight is look out the windows and take pictures for Earth observations, folks. One of our important jobs in the space program is to monitor the Earth's environment. You can see glaciers here in the southern Andes, Patagonia area. It's an area that we don't see very often on shuttle flights because we don't go to the high inclination that we had. We were at 51.6 degrees. This kind of terrain is of very interest to the Russian co-investigators on this flight because of the glaciers and watching the water runoff. We had one last chance to say goodbye to the Mir space station. You'll see it in the center of this frame, and then you'll see a meteorite go by. Shuttle has a unique experience of having meteorites go below it.
If you think Ascent is exciting or the Mir rendezvous is exciting, you wouldn't believe entry. The only way to take out the energy that we have put into the vehicle on liftoff is to come slamming into the atmosphere. There are not many molecules up high, but the ones that are there are screaming hot when you hit them.
And liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission that will herald a new day of international cooperation in space.
Houston now controlling.
Houston, Atlantis is in the roll.
Roger, roll, Atlantis. Atlantis is completing a roll maneuver as the vehicle turns into a heads-down position, on course for a 161 nautical mile orbit and rendezvous with Space Station Mir.
Once we got on orbit, we had an awful lot of work to do to get ready for the rendezvous. We open the payload bay doors. You can see the docking mechanism sitting there with the 6 black dots on the forward end of it. We had just a tremendous amount of activity at the end of Flight Day 1 and then all of Flight Day 2, getting our computers ready to go, getting our rendezvous tools set up. We had 1 or 2 unexpected events, including a little work that had to be done on the handheld laser, but we got ready to go in time.
We flew an intercept on the Mir that had us pick up the radius vector, or essentially come in right underneath the Mir and fly up below them all the way into docking. This is a shot that you saw earlier from the Mir of the orbiter over the Red Sea. We had a very narrow corridor that we had to intercept and fly up so as not to disturb any of the solar arrays on the Mir with our plumes. And as we got into about 500 feet or so, the Mir started its maneuver to the final attitude for docking.
And as it did that, we were able to start locking on with the TCS laser system because on the end of the docking module were the reflectors that system could lock onto. I'm coordinating that activity here with the ground controllers, and you'll see a shot here briefly of that final maneuver. You can see the docking node in the center there starting to come more in alignment with our axis, and you can also see the relative motion of the solar arrays in this particular view. And we were pretty much at the end of this event when the Mir was in attitude. We were ready to go on with it.
As you may recall, we moved into 30 feet and held for 5 minutes, waiting for the timing to get exactly right. It was our objective in the course of the rendezvous not to have to fire any braking pulses towards the Mir, and we were able to work the timeliness, the closure rates, and the distances such that that worked out just fine. We were able to utilize natural orbital braking to bring us all the way into docking and never did have to fire a braking pulse all the way in. This is the actual moment of docking as seen from the aft flight deck from one of the payload bay cameras looking out. And this is a shot that came down to the ground that showed both the centerline camera view as well as the view out the aft flight deck.
Well, this was the hard part. We had 6 people with cameras on one side of the hatch and 2 people with cameras on the other side of the hatch. And of course, everybody wanted to get a good picture. We had a variety of different cameras, stills, videos, IMAX, you name it, we had it. We didn't want to miss the hatch opening and the handshake, and you'll see we're flashing lights in each other's faces here. But it was an awfully exciting time, and we just couldn't wait to get that hatch open and greet our comrade.
We had been training and preparing for this moment for so long over the preceding year, working together with the Mir 18 and the Mir 19 crews. When the actual moment came, we found ourselves looking around and saying, are we really here, and have we really made this work? We had just a very brief greeting and a very brief ceremony, if you will, at the actual hatch. And of course, this was the first time that we had seen Norm and Volodya and Gennady, I guess in the previous, 8 months, I guess it had been since we had seen them.
And of course, going a little out of plan, we had a plan prior to this, and first thing we did was take that plan and toss it, and we all lined up and went into the Mir at that time. All 10 of us, I guess, were in there at that time, and I kept the camera running as we went through the Crystal module and arrived in the base block where we did our welcoming ceremony, I think.
So there we were, all accumulating ourselves in the base block or the core module. Obviously elated, really happy to see Gennady and Volodya and Norm, and they were, I think, happy to see us. I think it's the first time there have been 10 human beings in one spacecraft, and to commemorate the occasion, Bonnie put a STS-71 crew patch up on one of their comm pieces of equipment.
The following day, then, we congregated back in the space lab, and we performed a gift exchange, and we also mated a model of the Mir space station with the space shuttle. There was also a tour of the space shuttle that was conducted for Russian audiences. Norm did this, and in these sequences he's taking Gennady around the shuttle, and he'll later narrate this for a Russian audience, first in the commander's seat and now back in the aft flight deck where Charlie is showing him the controls for the docking adapter.
Well, once we got all the PAO events out of the way, we could get to work on some of the science objectives of the flight. And the day after docking, we did start on some of the experiments. We had a small series of experiments to do on this flight that looked primarily at the cardiovascular system, exercise, fitness, endurance, those sorts of things, and also some metabolic studies to look at biochemical, hormonal changes in the blood, changes in the blood chemistry, things like that. And Bonnie and I orchestrated most of this. Couldn't have done it, obviously, without our subjects' participation and full cooperation.
And it was a pretty long day. As Ellen mentioned, we had rehearsed this before, and with our Payload Operations Control Center down here on the ground, the POC. It all went as planned. As was previously mentioned, we performed several baro experiments on all three of the subjects, got some excellent quality data. We're very happy with it. Ellen also performed a number of metabolic experiments called MGAS. Here she's connecting up a rebreathing bag to Volodya.
And we also flew the lower body negative pressure device as a joint experiment between the Russians and the Americans. We had principal investigators from both countries on all of our studies. The Russians use lower body negative pressure as a countermeasure. We use it as a research tool, and we used it as a little of both on this flight.
Greg is wincing because he's having his blood taken there, and he'd rather be jogging like I am here, I think.
It didn't really hurt. As mentioned earlier, we did an awful lot of transferring of equipment, scientific and materiel. Here Hoot is transferring something called the PCG, and it's just one example of the tremendous amount of effort we put into those 5 dock days and moving stuff back and forth between the two vehicles. One unsung tremendous capability of the shuttle is its ability to return hardware back to Earth, and we took full advantage of it on this flight.
One of the more pleasant things we had the opportunity to do was talk to school kids around the world. We had SAREX contacts in California, Texas, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and over in Russia. We used the SAREX radios on board both the station Mir and the shuttle.
And as we showed in our slide, one of the big moments for us was to be able to show the new rocket's emblem and present the shirt to Anatoly, who promptly put it on and decided to demonstrate his basketball style.
Here we are closing the hatch, and we've already said our last goodbye there. And then there's Anatoly saying goodbye to us, eating a tortilla through one of the viewports on Kvant.
Greg and Bonnie were talking there about getting pressure checks done as we prepared for this moment. The Soyuz undocks from the Mir on the opposite end of the station and begins its fly around. We watched it with amazement at how well controlled it was.
These scenes make the Soyuz look pretty small and look pretty far away. Let me tell you how close he looked when he was sitting out there. I guess he had a laser rangefinder, and you can see some of the jet firings here as he was holding attitude just right out the window. We felt like we could reach out and touch him because he was that close to us.
At about 3 minutes prior to the actual separation, I sent the command to open the hooks, and everything worked just like clockwork. That mechanism worked superbly. And there was a set of push-off springs that separated the two vehicles initially, and then at about 2 feet, Hoot initiated a separation maneuver, 4 pulses, to complete the SEP sequence.
Of course, when we finally separated, the Mir 18 crew came up, waved goodbye. We had some exchanges on the VHF radio as well as we said sayonara. You're also seeing on the left there the Soyuz redocking. You just see it start to close in there. Anatoly did an excellent job. I was in the commander's seat. He flew from the port side to the starboard side of the vehicle and did a very smooth redocking.
We flew all the way around the Mir, doing more than a 360-degree fly around. We did our final separation burn and started translating away from the Mir space station.
Engine start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis with the Russian docking module, the threshold to world cooperation in space.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
One of the first orders of business was to assemble the docking module in the bay. And that involved using the Canadarm, and I had the honor of being the first Canadian to ever operate the Canadarm up in space. So it was a real thrill for me to use this big piece of equipment to install this large 5-ton Russian docking module onto the top of the orbiter docking station here. I used a bunch of different visual cues. Space Vision System was one of them, which looked at the dots here, compared them to the dots up here, and gave me relative position inside the cockpit. I also had this view here, which is a centerline camera. You can see there's an actual reflection in this mirror of the camera itself. And by the camera looking at its own reflection, I could align things very carefully. But we got it carefully in position within about fractions of an inch and fractions of a degree, and then Ken fired the thrusters.
That should work.
Slammed the two mechanisms home, and it worked exactly like all of the people at JSC had told us, and the mechanism just worked perfectly to lock them together.
After we had successfully installed the docking module, now it came time for our next big task was to take the docking module to its home in space, and we could see Mir from a long way out. The initial burns were done up on the forward flight deck, and then Ken moved back to the aft flight deck so we could continue with our operation.
As we got closer to Mir, I think the activity on the flight deck increased. Chris began to really operate the cameras, Bill shifted over to lasers as the TCS dropped offline. Jim was busy keeping track of the timing, the timeline, and the orbiter, and Jerry shot a lot of these pictures as well as operated the IMAX camera. Here, just about this point, the orbiter jets fired and accelerated the two pieces of hardware together. The latch is captured, and we were docked to Mir.
Here's Ken opening up the hatch that goes from the docking module into the crystal module of Mir. And as he opened up the hatch, the Mir crew was very excited to come in and see everybody. They'd been on orbit for about 2.5 months at this point. This is the commander, Yuri. And here's Thomas, the German ESA cosmonaut. And Sergei Avdiev, the board engineer, will be coming through in just a second here. As Chris indicated earlier, we did transfer over 2,000 pounds of hardware and supplies to the Mir station. And in addition, we returned something in excess of 800 pounds of equipment and experimental results that scientists will be looking at for some time to come.
In addition to the science we had on board, we also realized that we were these people's only visitors in a 6-month stay on orbit. And we tried to bring them things that would improve the quality of their life, which here included ice cream sandwiches. And I have never seen 3 grown men eat ice cream as happily as those 3 guys did. See, eating up an ice cream sandwich, and then Yuri floats the last of his little mini Dove bar into his mouth there. The gift that I think really meant the most was to bring Thomas this guitar. They have this old guitar that actually went up in Salyut 7. It's one of the oldest items in space. It's been up there for 15 years. We brought him a new classical practice guitar and had this opportunity to play together and sing in the Mir core.
Well, we did actually do quite a bit of work while we were up there. You could see the arm in position to gather data from Mir jet firings, part of a series of experiments in which we were trying to get data that will help us understand how the shuttle will interact with the International Space Station.
Well, the commander never let us forget that he was, in fact, a Marine colonel. And he was always up at the crack of dawn, in fact, before many times. And here he is shaving, and he's already racked the rest of the crew out of their bunks and getting us ready to start on another busy day of activities on orbit. You see Chris and Jim shaving, and Jim was one of these guys that did a lot of parallel ops. He's also brushing his teeth at the same time. Jim's still brushing his teeth, and now Bill got into the act, and you see Chris in the background there. He's reading his electronic mail. Well, Ken, as I said, was always anxious to make sure that his troops stayed in good shape, kind of like a Marine drill sergeant. And here's Chris getting in some morning exercise. And I was more into doing laps, so here I am getting some laps in on the middeck before the busy day's activity started. And you think that's easy to do, huh? Well, we demonstrated a little bit of physics. Here's a conservation of angular momentum. As we spin Chris around the middeck, it's rather tight, but as he expands his legs and arms, you can see the rotational rate slows down, and then when he brings them back together, it picks up again. This video gives you a good feeling for how rapidly a sunset, in this case, occurs on the orbiter.
It has been wonderful to see.
Here you can see things are starting to get ready to take a little bit sadder note. These are folks that we became close friends with on the ground and became just lifelong friends with on orbit. And unfortunately, at some point, it was time to say goodbye. And here, as was quite appropriate, Ken is the last one from the Atlantis crew to leave Mir. And we closed the hatch, and then the next day it was time to actually undock, do our fly around, and then get ready to come home.
To wave goodbye from our overhead windows, we could see the one or several of the windows of Mir. And here we are waving a final goodbye to our to our compatriots up there. It was time to actually do the undocking. With Ken at the controls, we released the hooks that were holding us in place, and springs pushed us away. Ken fired the jets right about here to get about a 0.2 foot per second opening rate. And from there, orbital mechanics accelerated our rate of separation from Mir. There's a good picture of the thing that we got the privilege to add to Mir, the docking module. We had these pictures taken by the Mir crew as we continued to move away. We moved out to a range of about 500, 525 feet from Mir. As we moved to that distance, Mir rotated back to its solar inertial attitude that would put its solar panels in the most advantageous orientation to the sun. Kim was generous enough to relinquish the controls for a period of time during the fly-around to let me get the opportunity to experience for the first time what it's like to fly the shuttle in space, and I really appreciated that. We flew 2 loops around Mir, 2 complete loops around Mir, and then Ken from the forward compartment actually did the separation burn that finally separated us away from Mir. As the orbiter re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, we experience temperatures on the outside of up to about 2,800 degrees, and that ionizes the atmosphere and leaves a contrail behind us that any jet would be proud to lay down. I think you could really see it for about 1,000 miles behind us. And here's Jerry demonstrating that, yes, we are starting to re-enter the Earth's gravitational field. And this is from about 235,000 feet, about 50 miles in altitude, going over the Canadian Cascades and Rockies, and that gives you a real feel for just the sensation of speed that you get at this point in the entry.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Atlantis on the 3rd Shuttle Mir docking flight.
Roll programming. Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Mission Control sees a good maneuver placing Atlantis on the proper heading. Pretty good engine.
This is a view of Florida from KidSat, and I want to emphasize that we really began the rendezvous portion of this mission right from launch, as we launched into a lower catch-up orbit on Mir. And as we prepared on Flight Day 2, our particular role in the rendezvous, we got closer and closer to Mir. But we didn't really get the good video, of course, until we got within 1,000 feet or so. This is the Mir view, what they saw as they were looking down at the Space Shuttle Atlantis. We included a couple of views of the crew activities on the flight deck. Chili at the aft station flying the vehicle, Rich assisting him, and I was bobbing in and out of the field of view there, working the computers and assisting in my particular role. This is a view of the Mir space station as we passed from across the terminator, from sunlit portion of the planet to the backside. And it was very interesting to see that with the running lights, Mir was very visible, and it was quite bright even on the dark side of the planet. As this process continued of the rendezvous and approach up the R-bar, got closer and closer to Mir, and again, this was sped up too, and part of that intent was to make it flow quicker in the movie, but an added side benefit is it makes the commander look even better because it looks like it's really going fast. Chili just did a phenomenal job flying the space shuttle up to the Mir, and you can see this is the end game here. This is where it all comes together.
6 inches.
And hitting those critical docking parameters.
2 inches. See contact. Contact.
Yes,
I see a capture. Disarm, PC
I must confess to a little bit of relief in the cockpit once we reached that milestone where Chili's being congratulated by Rich.
This Mir complex is really large, and I have memories of standing back in the ODS, looking up through the tunnel and thinking that it was at least 300 feet up to the Mir complex. Here's a view of the initial hatch opening from the Russian side, of course. And you're going to see a couple happy faces here between Yuri Anafarenko and Kevin Chilton. Tremendous relief once you get there and you join up and realize that it's an excellent place to be. There's some good work going on up there, and felt like home for Shannon already. And they put her right to work. She was one of the experts in the transfer activities, and it's no small part due to the preparation we had here.
There's Rich and Rick taking off a docking ring from a gyrodyne. We brought up a new one and brought back a used one. We also transferred nearly 1,500 pounds of water. This is a byproduct of the shuttle's power system. So we removed iodine from our system and supplied minerals and biocide, and then transferred these water bags to the Mir space station. This is going through the shuttle side. There's some empty food containers which we returned to Earth from the Mir station. And finally, working our way to the docking module. There's temporary stowage in the white mesh bags of food containers. The middeck is where we had lunch with the Mir 21 crew on dock day. We went over for dinner in the base block of Mir to enjoy Russian food. Each night, if we had a chance, we sent mail messages by way of a laptop computer, and you see Shannon doing just that. On 3 separate days, we saw the comet, Takataki, in which it was very bright, and Rich was the first to notice that, and on subsequent days, we kept track of the comet.
Ron is helping Rich and I get suited up here in the airlock. We're getting pretty close to getting to our pre-brief timeline, and following that, we get ready to go out the hatch. Our first job was to install some clamps on the handrails to deploy the experiment packages later. And then our task was to move to a camera to remove it on the docking module. And this was used on STS-74 when they docked with Mir. And then when they left the docking module there, the camera was left there also. So one of our tasks was to remove it and bring it back to Earth. I took some of the smaller items back, and here you see Rich. He's translating with the camera itself.
Here you see Linda and myself removing one of the 4 meat containers for installation onto some clamps on the docking module. We tested out some new tools and equipment for use on the ultimate International Space Station, the rigid tether and the multiple-use tether, which we use to transport the meats to their work site and install them into the clamps. Here you're going to see one of those activities. And then one of the funnest things that Linda and I had to do were the deployment of the meats, and you're going to see that here. It's so much easier to do up there. You just give it a little flick and it flies around. It all worked well, and we deployed, this one here is meat number 4, I believe.
Now we're entering the docking adapter and heading over to the Mir space station. As you can see throughout this entire tour, it gets pretty crowded in the passageways there. Most of these bags are filled with transfer items going one way or the other. Here Ron and Yuri Yusuchev are working some of those transfers. And I couldn't resist the urge at a few spots in here to do a few aileron rolls on the way. Very shortly here, we're going to get to the node and take a turn. And I believe I went into Spectre next. We'll see when we get going here.
Well, finally, space vehicles are big enough to get a little lost in, huh, Rick?
Yeah, that's for sure. We'll see that graphically illustrated here in a little bit when we come back to the node. This is inside the Spectre module, which will be basically Shannon's home for the next several months. She'll be conducting her experiments in here, and this is actually quite a roomy module, and it's perhaps because it's not as full of the transfer items and other equipment as some of the other modules are. But it's starting to get that way. This is transit back out of the Spectre into the node, and from here, it should be going into the Command 2 module after that quick aileron roll. It's about a T-38 roll rate there, I believe.
Looked about right.
Into basically the cosmonauts' living quarters next as we go into the base block, the headquarters, if you will, of the Mir space station. And this little spinning is just to graphically illustrate the point that you can get lost in this space station, and you have to keep yourself oriented. And when you get to the node, stop and take a second and figure out which way you're really going. From here, we're going to proceed into the Command 1 module, and at the end of that is the Soyuz, and we'll get all the way down to the end picture here, and I poke the camera in board on the Soyuz capsule, and we'll see that shortly. The Russians use lots of bungees, both for hold downs and for pulling yourself along, and they're quite handy for translating. As you can see, I remarked to one of the other crew members earlier today that moving around Mir is kind of like being a spelunker exploring caves. There's a lot of long, narrow passageways for transit. Here are the Russian suits inside the Soyuz, and not only all three, of course, are Russian equipment, but Shannon's suit is in there. It was checked out yesterday, and she's fully and officially a member of the Mir 21 crew now. This, we just went by one of the little living spaces. Both Yuris have their own individual compartment for sleep, and it's a very nice opportunity for them to have some privacy during the course of their long stays on board Mir.
After really a whirlwind and flurry of activity over several days, we were all very sad to get ready to depart the Mir space station. This is the farewell ceremony, and I think I can speak for the rest of the crew. Certainly for me, it was the most emotion-filled moment that I'd had in orbit in 2 missions. Of course, saying goodbye to Shannon, there's Chile giving her a hug and wishing her well for her long stay up there until STS-79 goes back to pick her up. On undock day, we, again, were very busy on that day, similarly to the docking day. We prepared, configuration-wise, this orbiter and Mir complex to separate, and very shortly here we'll see that separation sequence and leading into the fly-around. This is Chile waving goodbye to his buddies over there, the Mir 21 crew, including Shannon. The Russians were very kind to ship down this video, which then came from SOUP to MCC and enabled us to put it in our crew movie in a very timely fashion. Separation here, again, sped up. We were, as I mentioned before, very sad to leave and wished we could have stayed longer and been up there with our friends. The initial separation burn, a couple of low Z pulses out to get going and establish the initial opening rate. And as we continued to fly out, we assumed a range of 450 to 550 feet targeted to conduct this fly around of the Mir, which I was privileged to fly, and it's been, for me, one of the most professionally rewarding things I've ever done. But at the same time, in the background of my mind, also a very emotionally charged event. This video will share some of what we saw from on orbit, which was just absolutely outstanding and flabbergasting, really, to see this orbiting complex out our windows, and here in this particular case to see video shot from the Mir of America's greatest technology achievement ever, a space shuttle in orbit. This is a view of the Mir space station over the Great Barrier Reef, right after we gave the KU antenna to COM to send TV down. This is the first picture that came down to the ground. And this particular view is as we Mir passes through the horizon, approaching the terminator, and no, it is not a model. We saw it with our own eyes, and that's what it was, and it was outstandingly beautiful with the backlit view, and something that I will always treasure in my mind.
Well, it's coming home time now, and Ron did a bang-up job shooting these scenes. That little camcorder that he holds, there's a self-shot on the way down. It starts weighing 0 at the start of re-entry, and then it starts feeling like it weighs a ton on the way down. So he did a great job shooting this. This is out the overhead windows. We're coming in through re-entry, and you can see the plasma trail behind the orbiter there. It pulsates like that and literally lights the cockpit up with flashes as you come down. Out the front window, you just get a nice steady pink and orangish glow as you go through the maximum heating, and here we are in a roll reversal. One of 3 that we did as we lined up for our approach at Edwards Air Force Base. Rather unique long-range shot here where you can actually see the RCS jets firing in the tail of the shuttle as we decelerated through around Mach 2, approaching Edwards to help keep the nose pointed forward. I logged a night landing on this one because officially the sun hadn't come up, but it sure was a pretty time of day to land. It was just, the xenons were on, but you really didn't need them. You could see the ground just fine, and there wasn't hardly a breath of wind in the air. It was real calm, smooth skies, and it just, you know, you knew what you were flying. The space shuttle was responding just so beautifully. It really flew marvelously and was a joy to bring in for a landing.